the rain was cold. Not the refreshing kind that washes away the dust of a long summer. This was the kind of rain that bit into your skin, that felt like tiny shards of ice reminding you that the world could be cruel, and tonight, it was choosing cruelty. Isabella Vance stood at the iron gates of the obsidian keep, her thin cotton dress plastered to her shivering body. Mud caked her bare feet. Her wrists bore fresh bruises, purple and yellow fingerprints from where her cousin had gripped her too hard while shoving her out of the transport cart. "Get out. You're home now, ambassador," he'd sneered, the word ambassador dripping with mockery. But this wasn't her home. Behind her, somewhere in the storm-darkened forest, lay the Silver Moon-packed territory, the only home she'd ever known. The place where she'd spent 23 years believing that if she just gave enough, loved enough, sacrificed enough, she would finally be seen. Finally be valued. Finally be loved. Ahead of her loomed the fortress of the Alpha King, a monster structure of black stone that seemed to swallow the moonlight rather than reflect it. They said it was built on the bones of his enemies. They said the king himself was more monster than man, that his wolf was so feral he needed blood sacrifices to keep from slaughtering his own court. They said a lot of things about George Robert, the obsidian tyrant. None of it mattered now. Before we continue, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments. I love seeing how far our little family reaches across the globe. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button right now. You don't want to miss a single story, and trust me, they only get better from here. Now, let's begin. What mattered was the sound still echoing in Isabella's ears, laughter. Her brother's laughter, specifically. The brother she'd raised after their parents died. The brother whose fevers she'd nursed, whose nightmares she'd soothed, whose secrets she'd kept. 30 minutes ago, she'd been huddled in the back of that cart, confused about why her ambassadorial mission required her to be bound and gagged. The canvas covering had slipped just enough for her to see the guards taking a break, and that's when she'd heard them. Can you believe how much silver the Alpha got for her? That was Kingsley, her cousin. 3 years' worth of grain shipments, plus mining rights to the eastern hills. Her uncle's voice, cold and calculating as always. And then came the voice that shattered her. I thought she'd fight more. Elijah. Her baby brother. Except his voice held no regret, no sorrow. Honestly, I'm just glad she's gone. Her suffocating kindness was exhausting. Always hovering, always sacrificing. Like we were supposed to feel grateful for her martyrdom. She really believed we loved her, Kingsley had laughed. That blood is loyalty nonsense she was always preaching. Blood is survival, cousin. And that useless Omega just became our lifeline. Isabella had stopped breathing. The words carved themselves into her chest, each one a blade finding the spaces between her ribs. Useless Omega. Sold. Lifeline. She'd spent years managing the pack's storehouses, rationing food during hard winters, nursing the sick through plagues. She'd given up her education to raise Elijah. She'd surrendered her own potential mate bond when her uncle decided her marriage would complicate pack politics. And they'd sold her. Not as an ambassador. Not as an honored guest. As a blood slave. The contract, she'd seen it when they thought she was unconscious from whatever they'd drugged her with. The official seal of the Silver Moon pack, her uncle's signature, and the words that had made her stomach revolt. 1 Omega tribute, Isabella Vance, bloodline of the Silver Moon, offered to Alpha King George Robert as sustenance and appeasement. In exchange for continued treaty protections and famine relief. Sustenance. They'd literally sold her as food. Now, standing at these gates, Isabella felt something she'd never allowed herself to feel before. Rage. It started as a small flame in her belly, then spread through her limbs like wildfire. Her hands, which had been trembling from cold and fear, steadied. Her wolf, silent and suppressed for so long she'd almost forgotten she had won, suddenly stirred inside her consciousness. They broke the bond first, her wolf whispered, and Isabella realized it was true. Pack bonds were sacred. They were supposed to be unbreakable. But her family had severed theirs the moment they'd signed that contract, the moment they'd chosen silver over her soul. She reached into the pocket of her dress, the only thing they'd let her keep, and pulled out a small, smooth stone. It was black as midnight and warm to the touch, pulsing with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. 3 weeks ago, before the famine had reached its peak, a delegation from the Obsidian Court had visited Silver Moon. Isabella had been serving drinks at the formal dinner when one of the king's scouts, a woman with silver eyes and knowing smile, had pressed this stone into her palm. "He wanted you to have this," the woman had whispered. "The king. He said you'd need it someday." "I don't understand," Isabella had replied, confused. She'd never even seen the Alpha King. "You will. When the world fails you, and it will, little wolf, because that's what the world does to gentle souls like yours, you press this stone and speak. He'll hear you. And he'll come." Isabella had thought it was madness. Why would the most powerful alpha in the realm give a nobody Omega a direct line to him? But now, with rain soaking her to the bone and her family's betrayal fresh as an open wound, she understood. He'd known. Somehow, George Robert had known her family would do this. Isabella's fingers closed around the stone. It pulsed harder, as if eager. As if it had been waiting for this moment. "Do it," her wolf urged. "Call him. Let them all burn." She should have been afraid. Every story about the obsidian tyrant ended in blood and ash. He was the king who'd supposedly killed his own father for the throne. The alpha whose wolf was so dominant, so feral, that he needed to feed on the life force of others to keep from going completely rogue. But as Isabella stood there, abandoned and broken at his gates, she realized something profound. She had nothing left to lose. And maybe, just maybe, a monster who chose his violence was better than family who called theirs love. The stone grew hot in her palm. Isabella brought it close to her lips, closed her eyes, and let herself speak the truth she'd been suffocating for 23 years. "You told me once that the world would eventually fail me." Her voice cracked, but she continued. "You told me that when it did, I should call you." Thunder rumbled overhead, as if the sky itself was listening. "They sold me, George. My own blood, they sold me for a season of rain." The stone went ice-cold in her hand, then shattered into dust that the wind carried away. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of rain and Isabella's ragged breathing. Then, the silence broke. Not with words, but with a feeling. It rolled across the distance like a shockwave, a presence so massive and ancient and furious that Isabella's knees buckled. She caught herself on the iron gate, gasping. And then his voice came, carried on a thread of power that bypassed her ears entirely and spoke directly to her soul. "Stay where you are, little wolf." It was deep. Velvet and gravel, authority, and barely leashed violence. "I am coming." The bond, she felt it snap into place. Not a pack bond. Not a family bond. Something else entirely. Something that made her wolf bow in recognition and her heart stutter with an emotion she couldn't name. "And by dawn, there will be no Silver Moon pack left for you to mourn." The gates before her exploded open. The gates didn't just open, they bowed. The iron twisted and groaned as if the metal itself recognized the authority of the voice that had just spoken. Isabella stumbled forward, barely catching herself as the ground beneath her feet shifted from mud to polished black stone. Warmth hit her immediately. Not the oppressive heat of fire, but something alive, something that wrapped around her shivering body like an invisible cloak. The rain still fell behind her, but here, within the threshold of the obsidian keep, she was dry within seconds. "Magic," her wolf whispered in awe. "Old magic. royal magic. Torches blazed to life along the corridor walls, illuminating a path that seemed to stretch into infinity. Isabella's bare feet moved forward without conscious thought, drawn by something she couldn't explain, a pull, a gravity, a need that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with the bond still humming in her chest. She'd never believed in fated mates. How could she, when her own family had taught her that bonds were just pretty words used to control people? Her uncle had a mate once, he'd rejected her the moment a better political alliance presented itself. Her cousin Kingsley had 3 mates depending on which pack he was visiting. Blood is loyalty, they'd always said. Mates were optional. Family was forever. What a beautiful lie that had been. 23 years earlier. Isabella Vance had been born during a blood moon, which the pack elders said marked her as either blessed or cursed, they could never decide which. Her parents had been mid-ranking wolves, unremarkable except for their extraordinary kindness. Her mother, Lydia, had run the pack's orphanage. Her father, Thomas, had been the head healer. They'd taught Isabella that strength wasn't just about dominance or power, it was about showing up, day after day, for the people who needed you most. The strongest wolves, her mother used to say while braiding Isabella's hair, are the ones who choose gentleness when the world demands cruelty. Isabella had believed her. She'd lived by those words. When she was 8 years old, a plague swept through Silver Moon. Her parents worked themselves to exhaustion trying to save everyone. They succeeded with most of the pack, but the disease claimed them in the end, a cruel irony that Isabella's young heart could barely comprehend. Her uncle, Samuel Vance, had taken her in. He was her father's younger brother, newly appointed as alpha after the previous leader died without an heir. He'd promised to care for her, to honor her parents' memory. For the first year, he'd kept that promise. Then Elijah was born, her uncle's only son, the precious heir, and everything changed. Isabella became the caretaker. At 9 years old, she was changing diapers and warming bottles while her uncle's mate, Celeste, attended social functions. She didn't mind at first. Elijah was beautiful, all golden hair and bright eyes, and he'd reach for Isabella with chubby hands like she was his whole world. "You're so good with him," Celeste would coo, before disappearing for another weekend trip. By the time Isabella was 13, she was running the household. By 16, she was managing the pack's resources during a brutal winter. By 20, she'd given up her place at the Alpha Academy, the elite school for future pack leaders, because her uncle said Elijah needed her more. "Blood is loyalty," he'd told her, his hand heavy on her shoulder. "We take care of our own, Isabella. That's what family means." She'd believed him. She'd wanted to believe him. Even when Kingsley started taking credit for her work. Even when Elijah began treating her like a servant rather than a sister. Even when her uncle's mate died and he blamed Isabella for not preventing it, as if she could have cured cancer with sheer willpower. Through it all, Isabella had held on to one truth: if she just loved them hard enough, sacrificed deep enough, they would eventually see her worth. The universe had a cruel way of teaching lessons. Present moment. Isabella's memories shattered as she reached the end of the corridor. Before her stood a set of double doors carved from wood so dark it seemed to absorb light. Wolves were etched into the surface, not the noble, regal creatures from Silver Moon's banners, but something wilder. These wolves had their teeth bared, eyes gleaming with predatory intelligence, bodies mid-hunt. Beautiful. Terrifying. Real. The doors opened silently. The chamber beyond stole Isabella's breath. It was a circular room with a domed ceiling that showed the night sky, not painted, but actual sky, as if the roof had simply decided not to exist. Rain should have poured through, but instead, the drops hit an invisible barrier and slid away, creating a waterfall curtain around the room's perimeter. In the center stood a throne carved from a single piece of obsidian. And on that throne, Isabella's knees went weak. George Robert, Alpha King of the Obsidian Court, was not what she expected. The rumors painted him as a monster, scarred, brutal, ancient beyond measure. But the man before her couldn't have been more than 30, with features so aristocratic they seemed carved by an artist's hand. Sharp jaw, high cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. But it was his eyes that pinned her in place. They were golden, not the warm amber of most wolves, but true gold, like molten metal, and they glowed with an inner fire that made Isabella's wolf whimper in submission and recognition. He stood slowly, each movement liquid grace and barely contained power. He was tall, easily 6.5 feet, with broad shoulders that tapered to a lean waist. He wore all black, fitted pants, a shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows revealing forearms corded with muscle and covered in swirling silver scars. Those scars told stories Isabella desperately wanted to read. "Little wolf," he said, and his voice, God, his voice, was even more devastating in person than it had been through the stone. "You're bleeding." Isabella looked down. She hadn't noticed the cut on her arm, the gash on her leg from where she'd fallen. Hadn't felt the pain through the numbness. "I'm fine," she whispered automatically. 23 years of minimizing her pain was a hard habit to break. His eyes flashed dangerously. In 3 strides, he crossed the distance between them. Isabella's breath caught as he knelt, the Alpha King knelt, before her, his warm hands incredibly gentle as they examined her wounds. "Who did this?" His voice had dropped to a growl. "I fell. When they pushed me out of the cart." "Who pushed you?" The question was quiet, but Isabella felt the rage simmering beneath it, a volcano waiting to erupt. "My cousin, Kingsley," she heard herself say. "But it doesn't matter anymore." George's hand stilled. Slowly, he lifted his gaze to hers, and Isabella saw something in those golden eyes that made her soul ache, understanding. Recognition. Fury on her behalf. "It matters, Isabella," he said softly. "It will always matter. And before dawn breaks, they will understand exactly how much." George Robert's hands were still on her skin, one cradling her injured arm, the other hovering near the gash on her leg, and Isabella realized with startling clarity that no one had touched her with gentleness in years. "Why did you give me the stone?" The question tumbled out before she could stop it. 3 weeks ago, you sent your scout. You didn't even know me." Something flickered in those golden eyes. Not quite a smile, but close. "Didn't I?" He stood, and Isabella immediately missed his warmth. With a slight gesture of his hand, 2 servants appeared from the shadows, women with kind faces who moved with the quiet efficiency of those who genuinely cared about their work. "Take her to the eastern wing," George commanded, his eyes never leaving Isabella's face. "The Luna's chambers. Draw a bath, tend her wounds, and burn those rags they put her in." "The Luna's chambers?" one servant gasped. "But my king, those haven't been opened since." "I know exactly how long it's been, Meredith." His voice softened slightly. "It's time." The servants bowed and moved toward Isabella, but she stepped back, confusion and fear warring in her chest. "I don't understand." "I'm here because of the contract." "Because she couldn't say the word sold. Not out loud. "Not yet. The contract is void." 3 words. Simple. Absolute. "What?" George's expression hardened into something carved from stone. "Did you truly think I would honor an agreement made by cowards who trade their own blood for grain? The moment they tried to sell you as sustenance, they violated 17 different pack laws. The contract is worthless, Isabella. You are not a slave. You are not tribute. Then what am I?" Her voice broke. "Why am I here? Why did you give me that stone if you didn't want?" "Because I knew they would betray you." The rawness in his voice stopped her cold. I knew, and I couldn't stop it, but I could give you a choice. Stay and let them destroy you slowly, or call for me and let me give you the weapon you need to destroy them instead. Isabella's wolf surged forward, recognizing something primal in his words. Weapon? George moved closer, and the air between them crackled with electricity. Truth, little wolf. The truth about who you really are. The truth your uncle has been hiding since the day he took you in. The world tilted. I don't. Your father wasn't just a healer. George's voice was gentle now, heartbreakingly so. Thomas Vance was firstborn. The alpha position should have gone to him, not Samuel. But your father was like you, too kind, too gentle. He stepped aside, believing his brother would lead with honor. No. No, that couldn't be right. Samuel made him disappear from Pack Records, George continued. Made sure you never knew your birthright. Because if you had known, if you had challenged him once you came of age, I would have been alpha. Isabella's legs gave out. George caught her before she hit the ground, sweeping her into his arms like she weighed nothing. His scent engulfed her, pine and smoke and something wild that made her wolf purr in contentment. You still can be, he murmured against her hair. But first, you need to heal. You need to remember who you are beyond what they made you believe. Isabella didn't remember being carried to the chambers. She came back to herself in a bathtub carved from white marble, warm water infused with herbs that made her wounds stop throbbing. The servants, Meredith and a younger woman named Claire, worked in comfortable silence, washing away the mud and blood with careful hands. He's been waiting for you, Meredith said softly, working lavender oil through Isabella's tangled hair. The king. For 3 years now. Isabella's eyes snapped open. What? Claire smiled, her eyes twinkling. We all thought he'd given up on the mate bond. After what happened with his father, after he took the throne in blood, he seemed determined to rule alone. Then 3 years ago, he came back from a border negotiation with Silver Moon and everything changed. He'd scented you, Meredith continued. At that formal dinner. You served him wine, do you remember? Isabella did. She remembered because the visiting Alpha King had looked at her with such intensity she'd nearly dropped the pitcher. Her uncle had scolded her afterward for staring inappropriately at royalty. He asked Samuel about you immediately, Claire said. Asked if you were being courted, if you were happy. Your uncle lied. Said you were practically engaged to a warrior from the Northern Territory, that you were cherished and protected. The water suddenly felt too hot. George knew it was a lie, Meredith's voice dropped to a whisper. Mates always know. But he couldn't just take you, that would have violated pack law and started a war. So he waited. Watched. Sent scouts to check on you. 3 weeks ago, we heard about the famine, Claire continued. The king knew what your uncle would do. Men like Samuel always sacrifice the innocent first. Isabella's hands trembled beneath the water. So the stone was your choice, Meredith finished firmly. He gave you the power to call for him, but the decision had to be yours. He would have come for you eventually, but he wanted you to choose him. Choose yourself. They dressed her in a gown of deep emerald silk that moved like water against her skin. It had delicate silver embroidery along the edges, wolves running beneath a full moon. When Isabella looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked regal. The servants led her back to the throne room where George waited, but he wasn't alone now. 3 men stood with him, clearly high-ranking officials based on their bearing and the deference the servants showed. George's eyes widened when he saw her, and for a moment, the terrifying Alpha King looked almost vulnerable. Beautiful, he breathed, then seemed to catch himself. Isabella, these are my advisors. We've been discussing Silver Moon. The eldest advisor, a silver-haired man with battle scars crisscrossing his face, stepped forward. My lady, we've received word that your former pack is spreading rumors. They claim you seduced the king, that you're a traitor who abandoned them during their time of need. Ice flooded Isabella's veins. They're telling people I wanted this? They're protecting themselves, George said, his voice deadly calm. Rewriting the narrative before the truth can spread. By tomorrow, every pack in the region will believe you're a power-hungry Omega who used her connection to me to escape your duties. The betrayal cut deeper than Isabella thought possible. Even now, even after everything, they were taking her story, her truth, and twisting it into something ugly. What do I do? She whispered. George crossed to her in 2 strides, tilting her chin up with gentle fingers. You go back. What? Tomorrow night, there's a gathering of the regional packs. Your uncle requested it, wants to solidify alliances now that he's generously maintained peace with the Obsidian Court. His smile was all teeth. You will attend as my mate. My chosen Luna. And you will show them exactly what happens when gentle souls finally bare their fangs. Isabella's wolf howled in approval. For the first time in 23 years, Isabella Vance smiled with something that tasted like vengeance. When do we leave? Isabella didn't sleep that night. How could she, when her entire world had been turned inside out? She lay in the massive bed of the Luna's chambers, a room that seemed frozen in time with its silk curtains and hand-carved furniture, staring at the ceiling and trying to reconcile everything she'd learned. She was supposed to be Alpha. George Robert was her mate. And tomorrow, she would face the family who'd sold her. Near dawn, a soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Come in, she called, expecting Meredith or Claire. Instead, George stepped through the door, and Isabella's breath caught. He'd changed from his formal attire into simple black pants and a loose white shirt that somehow made him look even more devastating. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. Can't sleep either? His voice was rough with exhaustion. Too much to think about. Isabella sat up, acutely aware that she wore only a thin nightgown. Shouldn't you be resting? Tomorrow will be. Tomorrow I'll watch you reclaim everything they stole from you. He moved closer, stopping at the foot of her bed. Tonight, I wanted to make sure you understand what you're walking into. The concern in his golden eyes made her chest tight. Tell me. George was silent for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. Your uncle will try to break you publicly. He'll use every moment of kindness you showed them, every sacrifice you made, and twist it into evidence of your weakness. He'll paint you as naive, manipulative, ungrateful. I know. Isabella's voice was steadier than she felt. He'll bring Elijah. That made her flinch. George noticed. Of course he noticed. Your brother will be the weapon he uses. Because Samuel knows that's where you're still vulnerable. Isabella closed her eyes, remembering Elijah's laughter in the rain. Her suffocating kindness was exhausting. What if he's right? The words escaped before she could stop them. What if I was suffocating? What if everything I did was just too much? The bed dipped as George sat beside her, his weight solid and grounding. When she opened her eyes, he was closer than she'd expected, close enough that she could see flecks of bronze in his golden irises. Isabella, look at me. His hand cupped her face with devastating gentleness. There is no such thing as loving too much. The problem was never your heart, it was theirs. They took and took and took because you kept giving, and when they drained you dry, they blamed you for running out. A sob caught in her throat. I raised him, she whispered. Elijah. I was 9 years old and I raised him like he was mine. I taught him to read, to shift, to control his wolf. I sat with him through nightmares and celebrated every victory, and I thought, her voice broke. I thought he loved me. He did. George's thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Children love purely, Isabella. But your uncle poisoned that love year by year, taught him that your devotion was something to exploit rather than treasure. What Elijah became isn't your failure, it's Samuel's. Then why does it hurt so much? Because grief isn't logical. George's voice softened. You're mourning the brother you thought you had, the family you deserved. That pain is valid, little wolf. But don't let it convince you that you were wrong to love them. Let it remind you that you deserved better. Isabella hadn't cried when they'd thrown her from the cart. Hadn't cried when she'd heard their mocking laughter. But now, with this powerful alpha holding her like she was precious, the dam finally broke. George pulled her into his arms, and Isabella shattered against his chest. She woke hours later, sunlight streaming through the windows. She was still in George's arms, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. At some point, they'd shifted to lie down, and he'd wrapped himself around her like a shield. Isabella knew she should move. This was inappropriate, too intimate for two people who'd barely known each other a day. But her wolf had other ideas. Mate, she purred contentedly. Safe. Home. You're awake, George rumbled, his chest vibrating with the words. I fell asleep on you. I'm sorry, Don't. His arms tightened slightly. Don't apologize for taking comfort, Isabella. You're allowed to need someone. Those words settled something deep in her soul. They lay there in comfortable silence until Meredith knocked, announcing that preparations for the gathering were underway. George reluctantly released her, but not before pressing a kiss to her forehead that made her toes curl. We leave at sunset, he said. Meredith will help you prepare. I want you to wear the crown. Crown? His smile was pure predatory satisfaction. You're going to be introduced as my Luna, Isabella. That comes with a crown, a title, and the full protection of the Obsidian Court. Your uncle wants to play politics? Let's remind him what real power looks like. The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. Meredith and Claire worked with the efficiency of a military operation, transforming Isabella from a broken Omega into something altogether different. The gown they'd chosen was midnight blue, so dark it was almost black, with silver threading that caught the light like stars. It hugged her curves before flowing into a train that whispered against the floor. The neckline was modest but elegant, and the sleeves were long and fitted with delicate buttons at the wrists. But it was the crown that stole her breath. Silver and moonstone, delicate yet unmistakably powerful. When Meredith placed it on her head, Isabella felt something shift inside her, not just metaphorically, but physically. Power hummed through her veins, old magic recognizing her birthright. The Luna's crown only accepts those worthy to wear it, Claire whispered, awe in her voice. It's been dormant for decades, but look, it's glowing. Isabella looked in the mirror and gasped. The moonstones were indeed glowing with soft inner light, and her eyes had shifted from their usual brown to something brighter, almost silver. Your wolf is rising, Meredith said with satisfaction. The alpha bloodline is awakening. You're not just playing the part, my lady. You're becoming what you were always meant to be. A knock at the door made them all turn. George entered, and the air between them ignited. He wore formal regalia, black leather and silver armor that made him look every inch the warrior king. His eyes widened when he saw her, and Isabella watched his control visibly fracture. You look, he cleared his throat. The gathering starts in an hour. My Luna, are you ready to face your demons? Isabella straightened her spine, feeling the weight of the crown, the power of her bloodline, and the strength of the mate bond thrumming between them. She thought of every insult, every dismissal, every moment they'd made her feel small. I'm ready to show them exactly who Isabella Vance really is. George's answering smile was absolutely feral. Then let's go remind Silver Moon what happens when they underestimate a wolf in sheep's clothing. The gathering was held in neutral territory, a massive stone hall built centuries ago for interpack negotiations. Isabella could feel the eyes on her the moment she and George entered, his hand firm and possessive on the small of her back. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Is that really her? The Silver Moon Omega? She looks like a queen. Isabella kept her chin high, her expression serene, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. The crown on her head pulsed with warmth, as if encouraging her. At the far end of the hall, seated at the head table, was her uncle Samuel. His face had gone pale, eyes wide with shock that quickly morphed into barely concealed rage. Beside him sat Kingsley, looking smug until he caught sight of Isabella, then his expression crumbled into something like fear. And Elijah. Her brother sat on Samuel's other side, golden hair perfectly styled, wearing the ceremonial sash of the Silver Moon heir. When their eyes met, he had the audacity to look away first. Breathe, little wolf, George murmured against her ear. Remember, you hold all the power here. The gathering master, a neutral elder named Thomas Greyclaw, stood to address the assembly. We gather tonight to celebrate the continued alliance between Silver Moon Pack and the Obsidian Court. Alpha Samuel has requested. Forgive the interruption, Elder Greyclaw, George's voice cut through the hall like a blade. But there are matters that must be addressed before we proceed with any celebration. Samuel shot to his feet. Alpha King Robert, surely whatever concerns you have can wait until after. Sit down, Samuel. George didn't raise his voice, but the command in it made every wolf in the room instinctively submit. Even Samuel dropped back into his chair. I have questions about a contract you presented to my court 3 weeks ago. The room went silent. A contract offering one Isabella Vance as tribute, specifically as a blood slave to appease my feral nature. George's smile was all teeth. Strange, considering I never requested such a thing. Stranger still that the Omega in question was never informed she was being sold. Gasps echoed through the hall. Samuel's face turned red. You're twisting the facts. Isabella was sent as an ambassador, a gesture of goodwill during our time of need. If she's told you otherwise, she's lying to manipulate. Careful, George interrupted, his voice dropping to a lethal purr. You're speaking about my mate. My chosen Luna. And I don't take kindly to anyone calling her a liar. The revelation detonated like a bomb. The entire hall erupted in shocked voices, wolves standing from their seats, alphas demanding explanations. But Isabella only had eyes for Elijah, who'd gone white as snow. Samuel recovered first, his politician smile sliding into place. Your mate? How convenient. Alpha King, surely you can see how this looks. A lowly Omega seduces the most powerful Alpha in the realm to escape her duties to her pack. Duties? Isabella's voice rang out, clear and strong, silencing the chaos. She stepped forward, away from George's protective presence. Tell me, Uncle, what duties did I have? Was it my duty to manage your storehouses for 15 years without pay? My duty to raise your son while you and your mate took vacations? My duty to give up my education, my future, my life, so that you could maintain your position? Isabella, you're being hysterical. I'm being honest. She moved closer to the head table, and wolves parted before her like water. For 23 years, you told me blood meant loyalty. That family came first. That if I just sacrificed enough, I would finally be valued. Her voice didn't shake. The crown on her head blazed brighter. So I gave everything. I worked until my hands bled. I smiled through every dismissal, every insult, every moment you made me feel invisible. And when the famine came, when your pack needed help, what did you do? The question hung in the air like an executioner's blade. You sold me. Isabella's eyes swept the room, making sure every alpha, every witness heard her clearly. Not as an ambassador. Not as a gesture of goodwill. You signed a contract branding me as sustenance. As food. You valued me at 3 years of grain shipments and mining rights. Elijah flinched like she'd struck him. That's not, we were trying to save the pack. Kingsley jumped up, his voice desperate. You don't understand the position we were in. Then help me understand, cousin. Isabella turned her silver-eyed gaze on him. Help me understand how selling your family member into slavery saves anyone. Help me understand how my worth was measured in grain and silver. Help me understand, her voice finally cracked, how you could laugh about it afterward. Kingsley went pale. You heard? I heard everything. Isabella's hands clenched at her sides. I heard you call me useless. I heard you celebrate getting rid of my suffocating kindness. I heard my brother, she turned to Elijah, who couldn't meet her eyes, say he was glad I was gone. Bella, I didn't mean, Elijah started, finally looking up. Don't call me that. I stripped from every word. You lost the right to my nickname when you let them put me in that cart. When you stood there and watched them bind me and didn't say a word. Tears streamed down Elijah's face, but Isabella felt nothing. The part of her that would have rushed to comfort him had died in the rain outside George's fortress. Elder Greyclaw stepped forward, his expression grave. Alpha Samuel, these are serious accusations. If true, you violated not only pack law but the most sacred bonds of family. What say you? Samuel stood, attempting to gather his dignity. I say this is a performance orchestrated by a bitter Omega who. I have the contract. George's voice cut through Samuel's bluster. He produced a rolled parchment, its seal unmistakable. Signed and witnessed. Every word Isabella spoke is documented truth. The hall erupted again. Furthermore, George continued, his voice rising above the chaos, I have evidence that Samuel Vance has been falsifying pack records for over 2 decades. Isabella's father, Thomas Vance, was firstborn. The alpha position rightfully belonged to him. Samuel orchestrated his brother's death and erased Isabella's claim to leadership. The world stopped. Isabella turned slowly to stare at George. My father's death? George's expression was grim. The plague that killed your parents wasn't natural, Isabella. It was wolfsbane poisoning, administered slowly over months. I have the testimony of the healer who was forced to help. He's been in protective custody in my territory for 3 years, waiting for the right moment to come forward. Samuel lunged across the table, but George's guards were faster. They had the false alpha pinned before he could take 2 steps. You can't prove anything. Samuel snarled. She's nobody. She has no claim. She has every claim. George moved to stand beside Isabella, his hand finding hers. And as of tonight, she has the full backing of the Obsidian Court. Isabella Vance is not only my mate, she is the rightful alpha of Silver Moon Pack. And I suggest you all remember what happens to those who commit treason against their alpha. Isabella's world tilted on its axis as she stared at her uncle, her father's murderer, being dragged away in chains. Everything she'd believed was a lie. And the truth was so much darker than she'd imagined. The hall descended into chaos. Alphas were shouting, demanding proof. Silver Moon wolves were on their feet, some crying out in denial, others looking at Samuel with dawning horror. Kingsley tried to run but was caught by Obsidian guards. And Elijah just sat frozen, staring at his father like he was seeing a stranger. But Isabella couldn't breathe. Murdered. Her parents hadn't died serving their pack. They'd been murdered. By family. By the man who'd looked her in the eye every day for 23 years and told her blood meant loyalty. Isabella. George's voice seemed to come from far away. Little wolf, I need you to breathe. But she couldn't. Her lungs wouldn't work. The crown on her head felt too heavy, the gown too tight. The walls were closing in and there were too many eyes, too many voices, too much. Strong arms wrapped around her, and suddenly she was being carried from the hall. George moved with swift purpose, his scent surrounding her, his heartbeat steady against her ear. "I've got you," he murmured. "I've got you." He carried her to a private antechamber and set her down gently on a velvet couch. Isabella's hands were shaking violently, her breath coming in short gasps. "He killed them," she whispered. "He killed my parents and then he took me in. He looked at me every single day knowing what he'd done and a sob tore from her throat. How could he? How could anyone be that cruel?" George knelt before her, his large hands cradling her face. "Because power corrupts, Isabella. Because Samuel was never strong enough to earn the alpha position, so he took it the only way cowards know how, through betrayal and murder. I lived with him. I served him. I loved," she couldn't finish. "You loved a lie," George said softly. "The uncle you thought you had never existed. The family you tried so hard to please was built on blood and deception from the very beginning." Isabella wanted to scream. Wanted to rage. Wanted to tear the world apart. Instead, she just felt empty. "You knew," she said quietly, pulling away from George's touch. "You've known for 3 years. About my father, about what Samuel did. You knew and you didn't tell me." George's expression tightened. "Yes." "Why?" The word came out broken. "Because I couldn't prove it yet." The healer was terrified. Samuel had threatened his family. "It took me 2 years just to get him to safety, another year to convince him to testify." George's jaw clenched. "And because I knew that once you learned the truth, there would be no going back. You would have to choose, stay and pretend ignorance, or leave and lose everything you'd ever known. So you manipulated me." Isabella stood, putting distance between them. "You watched me suffer, let them abuse me, all while sitting on this information. You could have stopped it, George. You could have. I couldn't take you against your will." George's control finally cracked. "Don't you understand? If I'd shown up and declared you my mate, ripped you from Silver Moon without your consent, you would have hated me. You would have believed you were just another possession, another wolf taken by the obsidian tyrant for his own purposes. Instead you let me be sold. I gave you the stone." George roared, and Isabella felt his alpha power wash over the room. "I gave you the choice to call for me, to choose yourself, to make the decision to leave them. Everything that happened tonight, you standing in front of that hall, reclaiming your power, facing Samuel, that had to come from you, Isabella. Not from me rescuing some helpless Omega, but from you choosing to fight back." His words hit like physical blows. "You think this was empowering?" Isabella's laugh was bitter. "Learning my parents were murdered? Finding out my entire life was built on lies? Watching my brother's face when he realized his father is a monster? I think you're finally seeing the truth." George's voice dropped to something gentler. "And I think that scares you more than anything else." He was right. God help her, he was right. Because if her family had been lying about everything, if her whole life had been built on Samuel's crimes, then who was she? What was she beyond the role they'd forced her into? "I don't know how to be anything else," she whispered. "I've spent 23 years being what they needed. Being small, being grateful, being useful. You're telling me I'm supposed to be an alpha, supposed to lead Silver Moon, supposed to be your Luna. But I don't know how to be those things, George. I don't even know who I am." The confession hung between them like shattered glass. George approached slowly, like she was a spooked animal. "Then we'll figure it out together." "What if I can't?" The fear finally broke through. "What if I'm not strong enough? What if I'm exactly what they always said, too soft, too kind, too weak to lead?" Isabella. No. She backed away, the crown slipping slightly on her head. You don't understand. My parents were alphas. Strong, brave leaders. And I couldn't even stand up to my uncle. I let them use me for years. What kind of alpha does that make me? The kind who survived. George's eyes blazed. You think strength is about dominance and power? Isabella, you endured 23 years of abuse and manipulation without letting them break your spirit. You gave and gave and gave, and yes, they took advantage of that. But the fact that you can still love, still hope, still fight, that's not weakness. That's the strongest thing I've ever seen. It doesn't feel strong. Tears streamed down her face. It feels like I'm drowning. Then let me be your anchor. He reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. I'm not asking you to be perfect, little wolf. I'm not asking you to suddenly transform into some fierce warrior who has all the answers. I'm asking you to let me stand beside you while you figure out who you want to become. Isabella looked at their joined hands, feeling the mate bond pulse with warmth. What if who I want to become isn't who everyone needs me to be? George's smile was sad and knowing. Then we'll face that together too. Outside, voices rose in argument. Samuel's supporters demanding his release. Silver Moon wolves crying for justice. The gathering falling apart as alliances fractured. Isabella looked toward the door, then back at George. I can't go back in there, she admitted. I thought I could face them, but You don't have to. George squeezed her hand. Not tonight. Let the alphas argue. Let Samuel rot in chains. Let them all wait. You've given them enough, Isabella. Tonight, you rest. But even as he said it, the door burst open. Elijah stood in the doorway, his face streaked with tears, looking every bit the broken boy Isabella remembered raising. Bella, please, he sobbed. Please, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what he did to them. You have to believe me. And Isabella realized her darkest hour wasn't facing the truth about Samuel. It was deciding whether she could ever forgive the brother who'd helped destroy her. Isabella stared at Elijah, this young man she'd raised from infancy, and felt something crack open inside her chest. He looked so much like their father. The same golden hair, the same blue eyes, the same gentle features that had once made her believe goodness was genetic. But Thomas Vance had been murdered by his own brother, and Elijah had laughed while she was sold. Genetics guaranteed nothing. You didn't know about the murders, Isabella said slowly, her voice eerily calm. But you knew about the contract. You knew they were selling me, Elijah. You stood there and watched them put me in that cart. I thought, his voice broke. Father said you wanted to go. That you'd seduced the Alpha King and this was your chance to escape us. That you were tired of Silver Moon and you believed him. The words tasted like ash. After everything. After I raised you, loved you, sacrificed for you. You heard him call me a seductress, a traitor, and you just believed him. Elijah took a step forward, hands outstretched. What was I supposed to think? You never fought back, Bella. Never argued. You just took everything Father said, everything we did, and smiled through it. I thought you were weak. I thought that I deserved it. Isabella finished for him, and watched him flinch. You thought my kindness was weakness. My love was suffocation. My sacrifice was manipulation. No. I mean, Elijah's face crumpled. I don't know what I thought anymore. Father always said you were too emotional, too soft. That the pack needed strength, not sentiment. I grew up hearing that, believing that. And then Kingsley started saying you were only being nice to control us, to make us feel guilty, and You chose to believe him over me. Isabella's voice remained steady even as her heart shattered all over again. Every time you had a choice between your father's lies and the truth you could see with your own eyes, you chose the lies. Because they were easier. Because they let you feel superior. Because they excused you from feeling guilty about how you treated me. George's hand found the small of her back, grounding her. Elijah dropped to his knees, sobbing. I'm sorry. Bella, I'm so sorry. I was wrong. They were wrong. I know that now. I know. You know because you got caught. Isabella moved closer, looking down at the brother she'd once loved more than life itself. You're not sorry you hurt me, Elijah. You're sorry there are consequences. You're sorry your father is in chains and your perfect life is falling apart. But my pain? My suffering? That was acceptable to you as long as you benefited from it. That's not true. Isn't it? Isabella crouched down to his level, her silver eyes boring into his. If Samuel hadn't been exposed tonight, if George hadn't revealed the truth, would you be here? Would you be apologizing? Or would you be celebrating your inheritance, toasting your father's clever politics, living comfortably off the grain shipments they bought with my freedom? The silence was damning. I loved you, Isabella whispered, and her voice finally broke. I loved you so much it consumed me. You were my whole world, Elijah. And you threw me away like garbage. I know. Tears streamed down his face. I know, and I hate myself for it. I hate what I became. What he made me become. He didn't make you anything. George spoke for the first time, his voice hard. Samuel gave you permission to be cruel, but the cruelty was already inside you. Every child has choices, Elijah Vance. You chose wrong. Elijah looked up at the Alpha King with something like fear. Please. Please don't take her from me completely. She's all I have left. My mother is dead, my father is a murderer, Kingsley is a coward, Bella is the only family I was never your family. Isabella stood abruptly. I was your servant. Your caretaker. Your scapegoat. But family? Family doesn't laugh while you're sold into slavery, Elijah. Family doesn't celebrate your suffering. Family doesn't wait until their whole world crashes down to suddenly remember they care about you. What do you want me to do? Elijah's voice rose in desperation. Tell me what to do and I'll do it. I'll testify against Father. I'll give up my claim to Silver Moon. I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to you, just please, please don't leave me with nothing. And there it was. The manipulation Isabella had fallen for 1,000 times before. The pleading eyes, the desperate promises, the implicit threat that if she didn't forgive him, didn't save him, didn't sacrifice herself one more time, she would be the cruel one. She felt it pulling at her, that old instinct to comfort, to fix, to make everything okay even at the cost of her own peace. But then George's hand squeezed hers, and she felt the crown on her head pulse with warmth, and somewhere deep inside, her wolf snarled. No more. I want you to leave, Isabella said quietly. Elijah's eyes went wide. What? I want you to leave this room, leave this gathering, and spend some time actually thinking about what you've done. Not how it affects you. Not how you can fix it. But what your actions cost me. Isabella's voice grew stronger. I want you to sit with the fact that your sister, the woman who raised you, who loved you unconditionally, was sold like livestock while you laughed. I want you to really feel that, Elijah. Not perform remorse because you're scared of consequences, but actually grieve the person you hurt. I am grieving. You're panicking, George interrupted. There's a difference. Grief is quiet. It sits with you in the dark and makes you face who you've become. Panic is loud and desperate and focused entirely on self-preservation. Elijah looked between them, his face a mask of devastation. So that's it? You're just done with me? Isabella took a breath, feeling something shift inside her, not breaking, but rearranging. Becoming something new. I'm done being your savior, she said. I'm done setting myself on fire to keep you warm. I'm done accepting crumbs of affection and calling it love. If you want a relationship with me, Elijah, you're going to have to earn it. And that starts with you taking responsibility for your choices without making them my problem to fix. How long? His voice was small. How long until you'll forgive me? I don't know. Isabella's honesty surprised even herself. Maybe never. Maybe forgiveness isn't even the right word for what we need. Maybe what we need is for you to become someone worthy of trust, and for me to become someone who doesn't need your validation to know my worth. George's arm slid around her waist, pulling her against his side. Guards will escort you back to Silver Moon's delegation. You'll remain under supervision until the council decides your father's fate, and yours. Mine? Elijah paled. But I didn't know about the murders. You knew about the trafficking, George said coldly. That's enough. As guards entered to take Elijah away, he looked back at Isabella one last time. I really am sorry, Bella. She believed him. That was the tragedy of it, she believed he was sorry. She just didn't know if sorry was enough anymore. When the door closed behind him, Isabella sagged against George, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. That was the hardest thing I've ever done, she whispered. I know. He pressed a kiss to her temple. But you did it. You chose yourself, Isabella. For maybe the first time in your life, you chose yourself. She had. And it felt terrifying and exhilarating and absolutely right. What happens now? George pulled back to look at her, his golden eyes soft with something that made her heart skip. Now? Now we go back into that hall, and you claim your birthright. You stand before those alphas as the true heir of Silver Moon, and you show them that the gentle wolf they dismissed has fangs after all. Isabella touched the crown on her head, feeling its power sing through her blood. She thought of her parents. Of the leaders they'd been, the kindness they'd shown, the strength that came from choosing compassion even when the world demanded cruelty. She thought of everything Samuel had stolen from her. And she thought of the woman she was becoming, not despite her gentleness, but because of it. Okay, she said, straightening her spine. Let's show them what a real alpha looks like. George's answering smile was pure pride. That's my Luna. When Isabella and George returned to the hall, the chaos had crystallized into something far more dangerous, sides. Half the gathered alphas stood behind Elder Greyclaw, demanding justice and a formal inquiry. The other half stood with Silver Moon's allies, arguing that George was orchestrating a coup, using a convenient mate bond to seize Silver Moon's territory. Samuel sat in chains at the center, his expression twisted with rage and something that looked almost like madness. Kingsley cowered beside the guards, but Samuel looked like a cornered animal ready to bite. The moment Isabella entered, silence fell like a guillotine. She walked down the center aisle, George at her side but slightly behind, a deliberate choice. This was her battle to fight. Her crown caught the torchlight, casting silver shadows across the assembled wolves, and Isabella felt every eye track her movement. Power hummed through her veins. Not George's power, not borrowed authority, her own. The alpha bloodline awakening after decades of suppression. You want proof? Isabella's voice rang through the hall, clear and commanding. You want evidence that Samuel Vance murdered his brother and stole the alpha position? She reached into her bodice and withdrew a small vial of dark liquid. The healer who'd been in George's protective custody had given it to her before they'd entered the gathering, insurance, he'd called it. This is wolfsbane extract, Isabella announced, holding it up for all to see. The same poison that killed my parents. Do you know where it came from? She turned to face Samuel directly. My uncle's private study. Hidden in a locked drawer behind a false wall. The same study where he kept the original pack records, the ones that show my father Thomas as firstborn, as the rightful heir. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. You have no proof I put it there, Samuel snarled. Someone could have planted. Your fingerprints are all over the vial, George interrupted smoothly. And the healer who administered the poison to Thomas and Lydia has provided a full confession. Would you like us to bring him in, Samuel? Let him tell everyone how you threatened his family if he didn't help you. Samuel's face went purple with rage. This is a farce. She's manipulating all of you. Can't you see? She shows up wearing a crown, claiming to be my brother's daughter. I am Thomas Vance's daughter. Isabella's voice cracked like a whip, and the sheer force of her alpha command made several wolves in the room bare their necks in submission. I have his blood, his pack bond, his rightful claim to Silver Moon. And you, she stepped closer to Samuel, fearless, you stole everything from him. From me. From every wolf in Silver Moon who deserved a leader worthy of their loyalty. You're weak. Samuel roared, lunging against his chains. Just like your father. Thomas was too soft to lead, too concerned with doing right to make the hard choices. I saved Silver Moon from his weakness. You destroyed it. Isabella's voice dropped, but somehow that made it more terrifying. Under your leadership, Silver Moon has hemorrhaged members. 15 families left in the last 5 years alone. Your policies drove away our best warriors, our wisest elders. The famine you claim came from bad weather? It came from your mismanagement. You sold our water rights to mining companies, poisoned our hunting grounds, and when the consequences came, you sold me to cover your mistakes. The Silver Moon wolves in attendance looked stricken. Some were nodding, others whispering among themselves. Is this true? Elder Greyclaw addressed the Silver Moon delegation. Have families been leaving? An older woman stood, her voice trembling. My son's family left 2 years ago. Samuel told us they were traitors. But they weren't, they were starving because he'd sold our best hunting territory and kept the profits for himself. Another wolf stood. My sister tried to challenge his decisions last year. She disappeared. Samuel said she'd gone rogue, but we never found her body. Lies. Samuel screamed. All lies orchestrated by this little. Enough. George's command shook the foundations of the hall. You've been given ample opportunity to defend yourself, Samuel Vance. Every word you speak condemns you further. Elder Greyclaw stepped forward, his ancient eyes sad but resolved. The council has heard sufficient evidence. Samuel Vance, you are charged with the murder of Alpha Thomas Vance and his mate Lydia, with the unlawful seizure of pack leadership, with the trafficking of your own blood, and with crimes against your pack including theft, corruption, and possible murder of dissenting pack members. He paused, letting the weight of the charges settle. How do you plead? Samuel's laughter was unhinged. Plead? You think I'll beg for mercy from this assembly of cowards? I did what needed to be done. Thomas would have run Silver Moon into the ground with his pathetic idealism. I made us strong. I made us. You made us ashamed. The voice came from the back of the Silver Moon delegation. An elderly man stood, his frame bent with age but his eyes fierce. I am Kingsley Greythorn, elder of Silver Moon and friend to Thomas Vance. I watched Samuel poison the pack bonds, watched him corrupt our values, and I said nothing because I was afraid. But no more. He walked forward, each step deliberate. Isabella Vance is Thomas's daughter. I was there at her birth. I witnessed her naming ceremony. And I testify before this council and the Moon Goddess herself that she is the rightful alpha of Silver Moon Pack. Other Silver Moon wolves stood. First one, then 5, then dozens. We stand with Isabella. True alpha. Blood of Thomas. The chant built like a wave, and Isabella felt something snap into place inside her, not just power, but purpose. Connection. The pack bonds she'd never known she had suddenly blazing to life, linking her to every wolf who called her name. This was what her father must have felt. This was what Samuel had stolen. The council finds Samuel Vance guilty, Elder Greyclaw pronounced. He will be stripped of his title, his pack bond severed, and he will face trial for murder. Kingsley Vance will be held as an accomplice to trafficking. Elijah Vance will face judgment for his complicity. And Silver Moon? Isabella asked, her voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Elder Greyclaw smiled. Silver Moon Pack recognizes its true alpha. Isabella Vance, daughter of Thomas, do you accept the responsibility of leadership? Do you swear to protect and serve your pack with honor? Isabella looked at George, who nodded with fierce pride. She looked at the Silver Moon wolves watching her with hope in their eyes. She thought of her parents, of the leaders they'd been. And she thought of the scared, broken girl who'd stood in the rain just days ago, believing she was worth nothing more than grain shipments. That girl was gone. In her place stood an alpha. I accept, Isabella said, and felt the crown on her head flare with blinding light. I swear on my blood, on my parents' memory, on the moon goddess herself, I will lead Silver Moon back to honor. I will heal what has been broken. And I will never let my wolves forget that true strength comes from choosing compassion even when the world demands cruelty. The hall erupted in cheers. George pulled her into his arms, and Isabella felt the mate bond sing between them, not ownership, not possession, but partnership. Two alphas, two hearts, choosing each other freely. Ready to change the world, little wolf, he murmured against her hair. Isabella smiled, fierce and free. I already have. 3 months later. Isabella stood at the edge of Silver Moon territory, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. The land looked different now, greener, healthier, alive in a way it hadn't been for years. Under her leadership, things had changed rapidly. The first thing she'd done was abolish Samuel's corrupt contracts and restore the hunting grounds. The mining companies had fought back, threatened legal action, but George's support, both political and financial, had helped Silver Moon weather the storm. Families were returning. The pack that had hemorrhaged members under Samuel's rule was slowly healing, growing stronger. There were still wounds, still distrust, still wolves who looked at her with uncertainty. But every day, Isabella proved that leadership could be both strong and kind. She heard footsteps behind her and smiled before turning around. You're up early, George said, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. Even after 3 months, his touch still sent electricity dancing across her skin. Couldn't sleep. Too much to think about. Isabella leaned back against his chest, savoring his warmth. The ceremony? His voice held amusement. Among other things. Today was the formal Luna ceremony, the ritual that would officially bind her to George as his mate and equal ruler of the Obsidian Court. It had taken 3 months to plan, partly because of the politics involved in merging two packs, but mostly because Isabella had insisted on doing things right. She'd needed time. Time to heal, to grow into her role as alpha, to understand who she was beyond the trauma Samuel had inflicted. George had given her that time without complaint, courting her properly with patience and genuine affection. Nervous? He asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Terrified, she admitted. But the good kind of terrified. The my life is about to change in beautiful ways kind. George turned her around to face him, his golden eyes soft with love. You know you've already changed my life, right? The moment you called for me in that rain, the moment you chose yourself, you changed everything. Isabella reached up to cup his face. You saved me. No, little wolf. You saved yourself. I just gave you the tools. His smile was tender. You're the one who had the courage to use them. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by birdsong and the rustle of leaves. I spoke to Elijah yesterday, Isabella said quietly. George's expression tightened slightly, but he didn't pull away. How is he? Better. Therapy is helping. He's taking responsibility for his actions, not just performing remorse. She sighed. He asked if he could attend the ceremony. Said he'd understand if I said no, but that he wanted to support me if I'd let him. What did you tell him? That he could come. But that he'd sit in the back, and that forgiveness is still a long way off. Isabella's eyes misted slightly. He's not the brother I thought I had, George. That person never existed. But maybe, with time and genuine change, we can build something new. Something real. George pulled her closer. You're allowed to hope for that, you know. Wanting your brother to become a better person doesn't make you weak. I know. And she did. 3 months ago, Isabella might have felt guilty for setting boundaries with Elijah. Now she understood that loving someone didn't mean accepting their worst behavior. What about Samuel? Trial is set for next month. Kingsley is testifying against him in exchange for a reduced sentence. George's voice hardened. Samuel will never be free again, Isabella. I'll make sure of it. She nodded, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Justice, yes. Relief. But also a strange sort of grief for the family that could have been if Samuel had chosen differently. Come on, George said, tugging her hand. We have a ceremony to prepare for, and Meredith will kill me if I make you late. The ceremony was held at sunset, in neutral territory where representatives from dozens of packs had gathered. Isabella wore a gown of silver and midnight blue, her crown glinting in the fading light. George stood beside her in formal regalia, looking every inch the powerful king he was. But when he looked at her, his eyes held only love. Elder Greyclaw performed the ritual, binding their hands with silver cord and speaking the ancient words that would tie their souls together. Isabella felt the mate bond flare to life fully, no longer just a thread but a brilliant, unbreakable connection. Mine, George's wolf whispered through the bond. Ours, Isabella corrected, and felt his laughter rumble through their connection. When the ritual concluded and they were pronounced mates before the assembly, George pulled her into a kiss that made the crowd erupt in cheers. Isabella melted into him, no longer afraid of being consumed, because she'd learned that true partnership didn't diminish, it multiplied. At the reception afterward, Isabella found herself surrounded by silver moon wolves offering congratulations. Some were tentative, still uncertain of this new alpha who led with compassion rather than fear. Others were openly emotional, thanking her for bringing hope back to their pack. Alpha Isabella? A young girl tugged at her dress. My mama says you're going to make Silver Moon safe again. Is that true? Isabella knelt down to the child's level, her heart full. I'm going to try my very best. And if I ever fail, I promise I'll listen when you tell me so. Leaders are supposed to serve their pack, not the other way around. The girl's smile was radiant. You're nice. Not like the old alpha. Thank you, sweetheart. That means more than you know. As the evening wore on, Isabella found a quiet moment to step outside. The stars were brilliant overhead, and she felt her parents' presence like a gentle warmth. I hope I'm making you proud, she thought. They would be. Elijah's voice made her turn. He stood several feet away, hands in his pockets, looking uncertain. You're everything Father hoped you'd be. Everything I should have seen all along. Isabella studied him. He looked different, thinner, older somehow. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something rawer and more honest. Thank you for letting me come, he said quietly. I know I don't deserve You're right. You don't. Isabella's voice was firm but not cruel. But people don't earn grace, Elijah. They receive it. And then they spend the rest of their lives trying to become worthy of it. His eyes shimmered with tears. I'm trying. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I'm really trying to be better. I know. And that matters. Isabella took a breath. We're not okay, Elijah. We might never be okay in the way we were. But maybe someday we can be okay in a new way. If you keep doing the work. I will. I promise. She nodded, and he left quietly, giving her the space she needed. George appeared moments later, sliding his arms around her waist. Ready to start our forever, little wolf? Isabella looked up at the stars, thinking of everything she'd lost and everything she'd gained. She thought of the girl who'd believed blood meant loyalty, who'd sacrificed everything for people who saw her as disposable. That girl had died in the rain. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, who led with strength and compassion, who had found a mate who treasured her soul as much as her power. I'm ready, Isabella whispered, turning in George's arms to kiss him. And as the moon rose high above them, Isabella Vance, Alpha of Silver Moon, Luna of the Obsidian Court, daughter of Thomas, maid of George, finally understood what her mother had meant all those years ago. The strongest wolves weren't the ones who demanded cruelty. They were the ones who chose gentleness and made the world bend to accommodate it. Thank you so much for going on this journey with me, my beautiful pack. Isabella's story is one of resilience, self-discovery, and learning that true strength comes from honoring your authentic self. If her journey touched your heart, please hit that like button and drop a comment telling me your favorite moment. Don't forget to subscribe for more emotional, transformative stories that remind us all that we're worthy of love, respect, and happiness. Where are you watching from? What did you think of George and Isabella's love story? And most importantly, what title should I transform into magic next? Until next time, remember, you are not too much. You are not too soft. You are exactly enough, exactly as you are. And anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve a place in your story. With all my love. Your storyteller.